Our first presenter in the series is Gwen Yoshimura from EPA Region 9. Gwen is an air monitoring specialist and the air monitoring team lead with EPA's Region 9 Air Quality Analysis Office. She currently specializes in air monitoring of lead and sulfur dioxide. She also has monitoring, in addition to her monitoring work, has also background in planning with 5 years of work with EPA's Region 7. And Gwen holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Earth Systems from Stanford University. So without further ado, Gwen Yoshimura will be presenting her presentation entitled Comparing Apples to Apples, the Importance of a PQAO from EPA's Perspective.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Patrick, for that nice introduction. I'm Gwen Yoshimura from EPA's Region 9 office, and my presentation is entitled Comparing Apples to Apples, the Importance of a Primary Quality Assurance Organization from EPA's Perspective. So as Patrick mentioned, this segment of the training is going to give three presentations focusing on the Primary Quality Assurance Organization. I'm here to give the federal perspective and talk a little bit about the regulations and why it's important from the federal side of things. Darcy then will take over and talk about how ARB is working to implement the PQAO structure. And then we'll get to hear from Chris Collins and hear about how this is affecting folks on the district level. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to touch on PQAO basics. What do the regulations define as a PQAO? Why does it matter from EPA's perspective? What are those 5 common factors that are applicable to every PQAO? What are the requirements that every PQAO must meet? How does it actually affect people on the ground? What are the various types of PQAO structures? And then finally, I'll wrap up with some of the types of issues that EPA has seen that can be addressed through a strong PQAO. And then I'll hand it over to Darcy to talk about ARB's activities. So many of you may be aware this term PQAO is relatively new. We used to refer to reporting organizations as the entity that was responsible for ensuring quality assurance across all of your monitoring. And that actually created a bit of confusion. If somebody else's lab was reporting your data, does that mean that the lab is the reporting organization and that they're therefore responsible for ensuring quality assurance across all of the monitoring? Or what if you were reporting your data, but you relied on ARB to meet some of your quality assurance requirements? So recognizing that this term reporting organization created a bit of confusion, in 2006, EPA re-termed and came up with the term Primary Quality Assurance Organization. So the official definition in 40 CFR Part 58, Appendix A, is a monitoring organization or coordinated aggregation of such organizations that is responsible for a set of stations that monitors the same pollutants and for which data quality assessments can be logically pooled. So that's a lot of words. In shorthand, basically, by providing QA oversight, PQAOs ensure consistent, high-quality, defensible data are collected and reported. And they ensure that all data collected within a PQAO are comparable. So if you use an analogy and you say each data point is, each data point is an apple, and then you have 3 districts, say, that are part of a PQAO, and they all bring their basket of apples to the data picnic. You want to make sure that your PQAO has the oversight responsibility of ensuring that they're identifying or flagging any apples that have bites taken out of them, or while they're sorting their apples or doing data validation, you're identifying any pomegranates that might be mixed in there. So PQAOs are there to make sure that you only have your lovely apples. Okay. So Appendix A goes on to say, Each primary quality assurance organization shall be defined such that measurement uncertainty among all stations in the organization can be expected to be reasonably homogeneous as a result of common factors. So again, you have whole apples as a result of these common factors. There's 5 common factors, and they are operation by a common team of field operators, all of you, or according to a common set of procedures, common quality assurance documents, common calibration facilities and standards, oversight by a common quality assurance organization, and support by a common management, laboratory, or headquarters. Ensuring that all of this is common and consistent is a pretty big challenge, especially in PQAOs such as ARB, where you have a lot of monitoring organizations involved. You have a lot of different staff and a lot of different management. So as Darcy will talk about more, ARB is taking a number of steps to ensure that there is commonality and consistency across the ARB PQAO. And of course, we're here in this training to address that first of the 5 common factors right at the top of our chart. Common field operators are operating according to a common set of procedures. So we know about what the regulations say about PQAOs. What requirements do PQAOs need to meet? There's a whole bunch, some of which are listed here. To highlight a couple, if you're thinking about, well, so I'm part of this PQAO, but what if I just wanted to be my own and divorced from all of the other folks in the ARB PQAO? It can actually be quite costly and very resource intensive. Some of those things are, having your independent standards and audits can be expensive. You would have to meet your co-located monitoring requirements on your own. Also, another one that's difficult for smaller agencies is making sure that you have personnel that are independent from your site operators to conduct independent reviews of your data. That's one that we often see is difficult for smaller agencies to meet. And then, of course, we're here for consistency of field operators through training, and quality management documents are another thing that ARB has been working on and has available. And also, I think Darcy will be touching on more in her presentation. So different agencies have taken different approaches to meet these challenges. There are sort of 3 different types of PQAO structures out there. There's the multi-agency PQAO, which ARB is. There's single-agency PQAOs, meaning you have one air district, you are your own PQAO. And then there are those agencies that remain outside of the PQAO structure. This might sound great to you, but you can only do it if you're collecting non-regulatory data, and that's not getting reported to AQS. So in California, that constitutes some tribes, but really isn't applicable if you're collecting regulatory data. So this is a map showing Region 9, which is California, Nevada, Arizona, and Hawaii. And the color blocking shows the different PQAOs in the region. And as you can see, the dark blue is California's ARB PQAO, so it covers quite an extent. And then there's 3 other PQAOs within California, Bay Area, South Coast, and San Diego. And just to quickly address the other states in Region 9, in case you're curious, Hawaii has one air monitoring agency and across the state, and they are their own PQAO. And then you'll see Nevada and Arizona each have multiple PQAOs within their states, but they are mainly single-agency PQAOs. So ARB is very unique. Some examples outside of Region 9. Florida has a multi-agency PQAO that consists of multiple state districts and local programs and some private contractors. More commonly, we see setups like Maine, where there's a state agency as well as some tribes associated, or Kentucky, where there's one state agency and one local agency. So, a question to the group. Can I collect data for comparison to a federal standard and not be part of a PQAO? Excellent. Very good. No. And is it easy to become a PQAO? No. Excellent. Right. You have to meet a number of requirements, and you have to get approval from EPA. Okay. So what can happen if things don't go right in your PQAO? Debbie touched on these a bit. And, if you can't use your monitoring data, and say you're in a situation where your monitoring data would have shown that an area is now meeting a standard, but you can't use it, that can mean that the area has to keep rules about emissions controls and permit fees on longer. Or in the opposite situation, if you can't use your monitoring data that would have shown that an area is over a standard or out of attainment, in those situations, then you might delay implementing emission controls that would be needed to protect the public's health. So in these kinds of situations, it is sometimes possible to find a workaround your missing or incomplete data, but it oftentimes requires a whole lot of additional work. So if we can avoid it, that is our objective. And finally, of course, it's harder to respond to public inquiries if you don't have your data. So what kind of data issues are we talking about? I'm going to give 4 examples of some data issues that EPA has noticed through either our technical systems audits or just through our data reviews. So our first example is looking at PM 2.5 filter data, and this is a little bit confusing. So your left-hand column is showing your days of the month, and then your right-hand column is showing the monitoring information. So it's a bit hard to see, but you can perhaps tell that you have actual values collected on the 12th, the 14th, the 16th, the 18th, and the 20th, and the 22nd. So this site is getting data collected every other day, which is not an EPA sampling schedule officially, right? So you can sample every day, you can sample every 3 days or every 6 days, but every other day doesn't actually fall under any sort of official sampling schedule. So as a consequence of this, you end up having makeup samples fill in. So the red boxes denote your every 3rd day sampling schedule, and the arrows show you where you would insert your makeup samples. So in this particular situation, I think it turned out fine, but if this situation had carried on for a long enough period of time, it can affect your data completeness and therefore your design value. And just out of curiosity, does anybody know off the top of their heads how many makeup samples you can have in a quarter? 5. You can have 5. So if you go over 5 makeup samples, it stops counting towards your data completeness. So it's really important that you're holding to your official sampling schedule. Okay. Our second example, again, is PM filter data. And to orient us, the columns are showing your various months. And highlighted here, you can see there's yellow indicating invalidated samples, and then the red circles denote when the samples collected were actually over the level of the annual standard, so over 12. So if we zoom in on the blue box, you can see you're missing a lot of samples, and then these missed samples are surrounded by times when you had very high values. And this actually happened over the entire year, sort of over the winter months. So this is showing months 1 through 6, and you can see there's a number of missing samples in January, February, and March, which are surrounded again by high days. And then this is months July through December, and again, you have a lot of missing samples in December that are surrounded by high values. So this is something that we, certainly want to avoid, especially when you have missing data that can result in bias when you calculate your design value. There can certainly be situations where you need to take an instrument down, but it's always good to consider, can you avoid taking your instrument down in a high season? So our third example is switching to continuous data. And here you can see the yellow highlights a repeated data invalidation that is the same and continues over several months. So here the days are in rows across, and then each column is an hour. And we will zoom in real quick. So you can see there's just a whole bunch of these DA flags entered into AQS. And double gold stars, does anybody know what a DA flag stands for? We don't see it very often, so I didn't know off the top of my head, but it stands for aberrant data, corrupt files, aberrant chromatography, spikes or shifts. So it happened at this monitor that this monitor happened to have this flag quite a bit. So we'll flip through a couple months. So this is month 1, and again, the yellows are showing this DA flag showing up. Month 2, month 3. And this actually happened for a number of months over several years. So, you know, this is definitely something that we don't like to see. So, you know, given the prevalence of this issue, it can affect your completeness, which affects your design value, which affects your ability to determine whether your monitor is showing that the area is attaining a standard or not attaining a standard, which affects your rules and permits and your state implementation plans and all the things that Debbie touched upon. Okay, so our final example. Our final example is one that a lot of you might be experiencing in your organizations. It's been a time of a lot of staff turnover. And, you know, sometimes loss of staff can mean that you lose some key knowledge, and it can result in instruments not running correctly or data not being correctly watched and monitored, and the problem can go on for a period of time. So we've actually seen this happen. So as your organizations are faced with turnover, you might just think about, you know, it's very important to have clear procedures in place so that your institutional knowledge doesn't walk out the door with that person leaving. And you also want to ensure that you can cover your key responsibilities. And we know in the smaller organizations, it's often very difficult to do this. If you think that you're going to lose a staff person and you're going to run into issues being able to cover all of your responsibilities, talk to your friendly folks at ARB or EPA, and we can figure out a way around to proceed. Okay. So when EPA sees these kinds of data issues, what kinds of questions do we ask? We always are keen on documentation, as Debbie mentioned, so we want to know what documentation was recorded as the event occurred. How was the issue ultimately resolved? And were the quality assurance documents that are in place actually followed? And as we've been doing our technical systems audits, we found that these aren't always done consistently. And that was one of the audit findings from when we visited ARB in 2011. So to address these, ARB is taking a number of steps, specifically training such as this one, so thank you all for being here. How the issue was resolved. There's corrective action notifications, or CANs, that are available. And these differ somewhat from AQDAs, which you might all be familiar with. AQDAs, or air quality data actions, are used to address audit findings, but CANs can be used by anybody. So if you're out in the field, or you're a staff person, or you're management, you can issue a CAN. For QAPs and SOPs, ARB has a number of quality documents listed on their webpage, which will be talked about in the key documents later today, as well as a system by which, if you have sort of specific things that are unique to your agency that don't follow a certain established QAP, you can make an addendum and give that to ARB, and they can approve that, or you can develop your own document. So overall, you know, on the ground, what do we want to see to address or prevent these data issues? Communication is, of course, important. If you have these kind of issues, to talk to ARB if they can help you to determine if there's a way to address your issues. ARB will loop EPA in as appropriate. And of course, documentation. It's our favorite word. And then stepping back from a broader perspective, we also want to make sure that processes are in place to address issues in a timely fashion and that data review procedures are also in existence and being followed. Okay, so another question to the audience. What aspects of the PQAO structure could help address these data issues? Just throw out your answers. Training. Cans. More. Documentation, excellent. Okay, so cans, data reviews or broader data quality assessments can help you notice things sort of on the larger scale if you aren't catching them as they're occurring. QAPs, like data validation QAPs, roles and responsibilities documents. If you aren't familiar with those are going to be touched on in future presentations as well and are excellent documents, and trainings. So, how is ARB's PQAO meeting these challenges? ARB is undertaking a number of steps to streamline the ARB PQAO activities and communications, both between ARB and the districts, other PQAOs, we have Bay Area in the room, and as well as between ARB and EPA. Through trainings, data certification and network assessments, and communication with other PQAOs. So with that, thank you all again for being here. Just a note, I'm the Region 9 monitoring contact for ARB. So if you have any ARB general issues, you can always contact me if you want somebody at EPA to talk to. And of course, there's also always your ARB contacts as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Darcy. Or if anybody has any questions. Yes, I think, do we need microphones? Right here.
Gwen, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and thank you for your presentation. I trust that I can retain a lot of it. And I have a question that I believe relates to primary quality assurance operators or organizations, and specifically in the interest of maintaining quality data regarding sampling dates, since you showed the calendar and how that can be an issue. Mm-hmm. Perhaps this has already happened, but shall the EPA revise its current monitoring schedule calendar? Because the last one that came out is not clear, it's not concise. Shockingly, it doesn't even have the months arranged by quarter. And my requests and other air pollution specialists who have contacted the staff responsible have been met with indifference. So I'm putting that out to you, and I'm hoping that it can be passed along and or discussed as to whether there's a solution in store short of keeping districts to develop their own calendar. And I'm grateful to the other districts that responded to my requests for assistance, and I was provided with some homegrown calendars. But again, in regards to PQAO, that's pretty, if we're having to develop our own calendars, that it seems like could be a pitfall there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. And we're going to be seeing the OEQPS folks in August at the national conference, and hopefully some of you will be attending there as well. But I think it's a good point that we can make to them at that, and hopefully maybe a face-to-face will help move that discussion forward. It seems like it should be pretty easy, and I agree with you. What they have right now is not very user-friendly, and it seems like it should be an easy fix, so we'll definitely take that on. Any other questions? Can we get the mic? Okay. The question was, can I explain the CAN process and give some examples? What an excellent segue. So Darcy Gatto is actually going to talk about that a bit more in the next presentation. So you can ask her that question again if you don't get your answer.